Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're really getting into it, looking closely at three specific passages from religious texts.
Yes. The idea is to explore what these texts actually say about certain, well, substances and behaviors,
Yeah,
going straight to the source.
exactly. We want to get to the heart of their message. And for you listening, the mission is really to get a clearer feel for these viewpoints directly from the words themselves.
Starting with the first one.
Yeah, let's jump in. Okay, first up is Al-Nisa, verse 43. It starts pretty clearly. O you who have believed, do not approach prayer while you are intoxicated until you know what you are saying. That's quite a condition.
It really is. And it immediately links, your mental state, your clarity with prayer.
Right. And there's more. It adds another condition.
Yeah.
Also avoid prayer if you're in a state of janaba. That's ritual impurity unless you've bathed.
But there's an exception for just passing through.
Yes, exactly. So impurity is another factor besides intoxication.
And it's interesting that focus on not knowing what you're saying, it really highlights the need for, well, mindfulness, intentionality in the act of prayer itself.
Makes sense, being present.
Precisely. And the janaba part adds, perhaps, a layer of physical preparedness alongside the mental one.
Okay, but it offers a kind of practical solution, right? If water isn't available.
It does. It mentions if you're ill or traveling or come from the privy or have touched women.
And can't find water.
Then you can perform tayammum, which involves using clean earth.
Seeking clean earth and wiping your face and hands. It shows a certain flexibility.
Absolutely. When the ideal isn't possible, there's an alternative. The focus remains on the intention towards purification.
And it wraps up that verse by saying, indeed, Allah is forgiving and pardoning.
Which kind of softens the instructions, perhaps, or frames them within a larger context of divine understanding, compassion.
Now, we have a listener interpretation that came with the source material. It says, this suggests that weed and alcohol might be permissible outside of prayer, implying the need for focus during prayer. What do you make of that take?
Well, it's a logical inference, isn't it? The text specifically ties the prohibition to the time of prayer, and the reason given is about knowing what you're saying.
So the interpretation picks up on that limitation. It's about prayer time.
Exactly. It infers that if the reason is focused during prayer, maybe the restriction doesn't apply outside of prayer. It's focusing on the scope defined in the verse.
Interesting point. It does make you wonder about the specific sanctity of prayer time itself in this view.
Right. Maybe it requires a higher standard of presence.
Okay, let's move to the second passage. This one's from Almeida, verses 90 and 91. And wow, the tone here feels quite different, much stronger.
Definitely stronger. It lists intoxicants, gambling, sacrificing on stone altars.
To other than God.
Right. And divining arrows. It calls all of these defilement from the work of Satan.
Defilement. That's a powerful word, and the instruction is very direct. Avoid it that you may be successful.
It is. There's no ambiguity there. Avoid these things. And linking avoidance to success is also very telling.
It then explains why. It says Satan's aim, basically, is to cause between you animosity and hatred through intoxicants and gambling.
Social disruption.
And to avert you from the remembrance of Allah and from prayer. So social and spiritual harm.
Precisely. It lays out the negative consequences. Conflict, bad feelings between people, and, crucially, turning people away from God and religious duty.
And it ends with this really pointed question, directed right at the reader or listener. So will you not desist?
Yeah, it's quite confrontational in a way, a direct challenge.
So the listener interpretation for this passage says, this indicates that alcohol and gambling are seen as the devil's work and should be avoided, regardless of personal inclination, due to the negative consequences of enmity, hatred, and distraction from God. Does that feel like an accurate summary?
I think it does, yes. It captures the key elements. The strong condemnation, linking it to Satan, the explicit reasons given those negative social and spiritual outcomes, and the idea that personal preference isn't really the point here.
Right. The reason given in the text itself is paramount.
Exactly. It's presented as inherently harmful because of its source and effects.
Okay, now for our third passage, also from Almeida, verse 93. This one seems to shift gears a bit.
It does introduce a different kind of angle.
He says, there is no blame upon those who have believed and done righteous deeds for what they have tasted.
Ah, tasted. That word is interesting.
Very, but this lack of blame isn't unconditional. It comes with some heavy caveats.
Extremely heavy. It says as long as they fear Allah and believe and do righteous deeds.
And then fear Allah and believe.
And then fear Allah and do good. It's repeated with increasing emphasis.
Right. It really hammers home the conditions. And it concludes, And Allah loves the doers of good.
So, this appears to be maybe an allowance, but it's deeply conditional. It's tied entirely to ongoing piety and good actions, not just a one-time thing, but a continuous state.
That repetition really underlines that it's about consistent, deepening faith and action.
Absolutely. And that word tasted, what do you think that implies? Maybe past use before a prohibition was fully understood? Or perhaps minimal incidental contact?
It's ambiguous, isn't it?
Yeah.
It can suggest something less than full indulgence. Now, the listener interpretation here is, this suggests permissibility to taste anything if one is God-fearing and does good.
Taste anything. That seems like quite a broad reading.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
How does that interpretation sit with the strict conditions we just talked about?
Well, that's the tension, isn't it? While the verse does offer this potential no-blame scenario, interpreting tasted as anything feels like it might overlook the sheer weight of the conditions.
The conditions seem paramount.
They really do. The constant return to fearing God, believing, doing righteous deeds. It suggests that this isn't a free pass. The state of the person's faith and actions is the crucial factor, perhaps more than what was tasted, especially if tasted implies something limited.
So it's less about the substance itself and more about the person's spiritual state and consistent behavior.
That seems to be the emphasis in this particular verse, yes. The focus shifts strongly to the individual's relationship with God and their actions.
Okay, so let's try and, synthesize this. We've looked at 3 distinct passages. What are the big takeaways when we put them side by side?
Well, it's definitely not a simple picture. You have Al-Nisa 43 focusing very specifically on prayer time and the need for mental clarity, suggesting a potential temporal restriction.
Right, tied to a specific act of worship.
Then you have Almeida 9091, which issues a much broader, stronger condemnation of intoxicants and gambling, linking them to Satan, social harm, and spiritual distraction.
They're very clear. Avoid this message based on inherent harm.
Exactly. But then you have Almeida 93, which introduces this possibility of no blame for believers who do good for what they have tasted, but under incredibly strict and repeated conditions of ongoing piety.
So it definitely doesn't boil down to a simple yes or no across the board regarding these things.
Not at all. It seems much more nuanced. Context matters, the specific activity matters, and perhaps most significantly, the individual's intention, their state of mind, and their overall commitment to faith and good deeds seem critical.
The emphasis seems to fall on, consciousness, mindfulness, both in prayer and in avoiding things that cause harm or distract from God.
I think that's a good way to put it. Consciousness of your state before prayer, consciousness of the potential negative impacts of certain actions, and consciousness of your ongoing relationship with God and your duty to do good.
So just to quickly recap, Al-Nisa focuses on presence for prayer. Almeida 9091 warns strongly against specific things due to social and spiritual harm.
The Satan's work passage.
And Almeida 93 offers a kind of conditional non-blame based heavily on continuous faith and righteous actions.
That sums it up well. Different angles, different emphasis, leading to a complex, layered understanding rather than a single decree.
This has been really illuminating, actually, just seeing how these different verses approach the topic from, slightly different perspectives.
It really shows the value of looking at texts in conversation with each other, doesn't it? You get a richer sense of the landscape.
Definitely. Okay, so before we wrap up, here's something for you, the listener, to mull over.
A final thought?
Yeah. Considering these passages together, the focus on clarity for prayer, the warning about distraction and harm, the conditional allowance based on piety, how does this prompt you to think about intention and consequence in your own life, especially regarding things that might, impair judgment or pull your focus?
And maybe also, what does it truly mean to remember God? Or conversely, to be averted from the remembrance of what's fundamentally important to you? Something to think about.